All right, another question that I received a couple of days ago, but I didn't see it until this morning, and one that I think I'm going to have a good time trying to respond to. Has to do with our connection with our food, in particular, our connection to food that is the flesh of animals. Um, the person who had asked the question knows that I'm highly engaged in um, trying to live off the natural abundance. I'm highly engaged in nature. And the question was basically he has a daughter who has been raised really like most kids in the mainstream today, very sheltered from the source of their food. Um, but his daughter's grandparents on his wife's side um, are Filipino, and the kind of old Filipino from the Japanese occupation era, and could very easily, at the drop of a dime, turn to living off the land. They have all of those skills, and they still practice um, to some extent. They acquire their own foods, or at least butcher animals, um, domesticated animals, kill and butcher them. And so, my friend, his daughter is going to stay with in-laws, and my friend is thinking of asking them to expose her to some of that, so that she gets that experience. His wife has had, of course, growing up with her parents, she had some of that experience, and she feels like she might have been a little bit traumatized by some of it, but overall, that it was beneficial for her. And so, he wanted to know my opinions of that, of what he was planning to do with his daughter. And so here goes. I think, my own experience is probably somewhat like that of his wife. I mean, I grew up. My parents, they weren't they weren't hippies, but they were trying to live pretty self-sufficient. Like, I didn't grow up early on in my childhood anyway. I didn't grow up with a lot of store-bought clothes or food. Um, when I was 5 years old, my parents relocated us to the Willamette Valley in Oregon, and after that, I started remembering my life. What happened before that, I don't have much memory of, but everything in Oregon, my parents were, and I don't know if it was just because they didn't have a lot of money that they were living so frugally, or if it was just their interest to do so. But my mom was making all of our clothes, and they gardened, and so we had mostly um, growing our own food or going out to orchards and picking. I mean, I grew up in this kind of an environment where, like, I was kind of frustrated because I would be made to help with the garden, or to go and harvest this or that fruit on a Saturday when, I just wanted to be playing with my friends or that kind of thing. I mean, not that I was like just a workhorse or by any means at all. Actually, I think I was pretty spoiled as a child in terms of work, but I did have experiences that I don't think a lot of my other friends had, in terms of, like, having that connection with homegrown or wildly acquired foods. We didn't do much for hunting. My dad wasn't a hunter. I've done a lot of hunting, or a lot more hunting in my adult life, but I didn't grow up with that. However, there was a time, I don't know exactly how old I was, maybe 11 or 12 years old. um, when my dad decided, much like my friend, that he was going to introduce me to the source of my food. My parents had been, they bought meat. They grew their own vegetables and fruits and such, or we went to go pick them at orchards. Um, but the meat my parents always bought, and usually it was in big scale. Like I have memories of going with my mom to the butcher shop where she would have purchased like maybe a quarter of a cow or half of a cow. They always kept a deep freeze, and she would already have at the butcher shop. They would already put everything into they'd wrap everything in butcher, all the different cuts in the butcher paper. We just go pick them up and fill the freezer with that, and that would be like whatever our winter supply of meat. But when I was like 11 or 12, then my dad decided, no, going to introduce him to the actual killing and butchering, not just getting the product. And so the first time I was introduced to that was at a guy named Jerry Zollner at his place. He was an Austrian guy, and he was my dad's kind of crazy electrician friend. My dad was an electrician, and Jerry Zollner was his kind of crazy friend who had all kinds of weird stuff going on all the time. But in any case, Jerry had a pig that they had raised to be ultimately to be butchered, but the kids, the girls, his daughters, had gotten attached to the pig as a kind of a pet, and the pig was named Rosie. And I had been over there many times and got to know Rosie as a family pet. And then the one day we went over there, and it was time to kill Rosie. And basically Rosie was shot in the head with a pistol, and then hung up from a tree branch and butchered. And it was pretty, it was a pretty swift death. When you get shot in the head with a pistol at close range, it's just basically put against your head and bang. The death is pretty quick. There was a lot of blood, and then I got to see the whole thing, like the whole butchery thing, and I ended up taking one of Rosie's eyeballs, and I don't know why that is, but I find it very curious because now as an adult thinking back on it, I find it very curious because I think when death happens, the eye is such an important part of that. And in my experiences with hunting, it's the eye that's probably traumatized me the most. The eye of the animal that I'm killing. This traumatized me the most, because in the eye, that's where you can see, the spirit. And so I'm kind of like tearing up now thinking of the last animal that I was personally responsible for killing and how it looked at me. With Rosie, I didn't feel like I had a lot of feelings about it. I must have had some, because I knew her as the family pet, and I wasn't, this was not something I was used to being exposed to. An animal being killed, and all the blood and the butchery and all of that. I took the eyeball, and my parents allowed me to hang on to the eyeball for a couple of days to take it around and show to people who, like I remember I think I took it to swimming lessons and showed my swimming teachers this eyeball, and I'm sure that was the strangest thing in the world to them. But my parents were pretty good this way, where they didn't allow social convention to get in the way of what I needed to do my own learning. So I find it very curious that I took that eyeball. Anyway, Rosie, I I did eat parts of Rosie, and it was always a very conscious thing. You know, we knew when we were eating Rosie, if we were eating Rosie sausages. In fact, I was there when Rosie's intestines were filled with Rosie's ground meat to make sausages. So the first time I got to see sausages being made was being made from parts of Rosie. Um, and I think that was a good experience. Overall, I think, you know, certainly it should be traumatic for a child. It should be somewhat a little bit traumatic anyway for a child to be introduced to the killing. And even as an adult, I think it's a healthy thing to feel um, what it is that you're doing when you're when you're killing something. I've heard of people, you know, who are grew up as fishermen in tribes in Northern California and Oregon and such, just grew up with salmon fishing, but then one day, you know, it's just they see something in the eye of that salmon that they're killing, and they have to stop. They've done enough of that, you know. I think it's good to be exposed to that. The next time I was exposed to killing an animal after Rosie, we went to this place where um, they were gonna kill a goat, and the goat had actually been tied to a post, like tied, like almost like stood up and tied, bound to the post with a rope going around it like so, and it was going to have its neck slit. And I don't know um, why. My dad must have had some kind of predilection that this was not what he expected and not what he wanted me to see or something. But I remember being brought back to the car and being told to sit in the car while they slit his throat. But when they went to slice his throat, I mean, I was still actually within view of it. And when they slit the throat of the goat made this sound that was really loud and really like terrible. It was like, it was just, it was awful. And if anything was going to traumatize me, it was that goat. And you know, of course, the blood and all of that. And then, you know, after they slit his neck, then I was allowed to come out of the car and witness the butchering and that kind of thing. But the sound was something that I don't think my dad had predicted. And it was something that I would never forget. And you know, I'm glad that my dad chose to give me those experiences. In my adult life, I was introduced to hunting pretty much by my father-in-law. I went deer hunting with him on a few occasions, and typically when you shoot a deer, nowadays you have a high-powered rifle and you can shoot it at some distance. And if you're accurate with your shot, the deer goes right down. Might already be dead by the time you get up to it if you shot accurately. A lot of times, though, the shot is not accurate enough, and you get up to the deer, and it's still got some life in it, and then you just shoot it in the head and it's over. You know, hunters now, you know, if they consider it ethical most ethical if they train to kill the animal as quickly as possible. And I think that's true. I think that is the most ethical way to do it. However, I think it's probably important for people to be exposed on at least some occasions to the more prolonged process. And I myself, when I started hunting without the rifles, it ended up exposing myself to that. And what it almost brought me to, what it kind of choked me up a few minutes ago, was kind of a flashback to a porcupine that I just decided to, like in the winter time, I usually kill one or two porcupines and we'll eat some porcupine. I eat all kinds of animals myself. I always have venison and elk, and but then I got strange things like snakes and porcupines and such, rabbit. The last time I killed a porcupine, normally when I kill a porcupine, I do it with a bow. Shoot it with a bow first, and then give it a really good crack or two over the head to be finished with it. But a couple winters ago, I used a live trap, which is basically a box that would trap an animal in it live. I built the thing myself, and I put it out. And I was actually intended to get rabbits. I got a porcupine, and so I let the porcupine out of the box, and then proceeded to like try to brain it with a heavy stick, and it didn't die nearly as quickly as I'd hoped it would. And it actually kind of like pleaded with me, stood up on its legs and held its hands in defensive position, and it looked at me. And it was already too far. It was already too far gone. I had smashed it in part of his head. It was gonna die, but it clung to life for too long. I don't know how long how many times I had to hit it with the stick and such to actually kill it. In fact, the stick never killed it. I had to slash its throat, but I couldn't slash its throat until I hit it enough times to make it stop moving defensively. Otherwise, I was in danger of getting quills in me, and that took too long. It took way too long. And yeah, it was very, very brutal and that kind of a thing. But having experienced that, I don't like it. But at the same time, I think it's probably very important to experience that, and I think it's probably really the more ethical thing than just buying your meat at a market. So I don't know if you've ever been into a slaughterhouse, but every time I've been into a slaughterhouse, there is a aura there that is not good. Those are not good places, and the truth is that the killing experience is never good. It's a terrible thing to take something's life. It's a terrible thing for something to die, and at the same time, it's absolutely necessary in order for the energy exchange to occur that keeps life rolling. So, being kind of close to nature, I can see myself how this all plays out. For the most part, actually, in nature, a lot of the death is, a lot of the feast is on children, is on the children. So um, it's not really the adults that are often getting attacked by predators and eaten, but it's very often the young who are unable to defend themselves, or when it is the adults, it's the ones that are kind of frail or diseased or have some problem, but usually it's the young. And this is just one of the hard truths of nature, is that this is why all of the animals are made to have far more babies than could be sustainable. It's because the expectation is that most of them are going to be succumb to predators. Maybe 90% of them are going to succumb to predators, because that's the feast that keeps life going, is the feast of babies. And yeah, I think it's important to engage with that, and to I don't have a kind of a answer to say that this is what you're going to gain from it or learn from it. But I do know, it's important, because people are so disengaged from their food that I don't think they deserve to eat, in a lot of cases, the foods that they're eating, because they don't get to grapple with that killing themselves. And I'm not saying that somebody should have to kill every single piece of meat that they eat, because even in traditional indigenous cultures, there's people who are allowed to opt out of that hunting. For instance, here in Blackfoot culture, there are the people, the Iyakimiks, that take care of the beaver bundles, like my wife and I. And traditionally, people who are Iyakimiks are older people. We're the rare thing right now, with being fairly young people taking care of beaver bundles, but in general, they were older, and the role of the Iyakimi is to maintain the relationships between the people and the animals, and so out of respect for that role, they don't hunt, but they still eat. Other people hunt for them, and they've hunted, certainly in their lives, a lot. They've done a lot of killing beforehand. So, personally, I do think it's important. I do think it's you not really having a human experience, and you're less of a real human being in a way, when you haven't been exposed to that. I think it's important. At the same time, though, I think there's a lot to what you're going to do with that experience. Ultimately, how you're going to grow from that experience. That I'm still even now at 42, I'm still in that process of growing and learning from it, and I still have my own difficulties engaging with it, but I do engage. I force myself to engage, because I do think it's important that people do so, and not be able to just spend their whole lives going and buying meat, and not understanding really that those are living creatures, or were. So I think it's a good thing, my friend, that you're planning to expose your daughter to that. I think even if it's a little bit traumatizing, that's important, because if somebody can be witness or participant to that and not be at all affected, I'd worry about such a person, But at the same time, I think there is a good benefit to engaging with your own food, especially because, at some point we might really need to go back to being really real human beings. instead of these participants in the global food trade that's bringing about the famine, that's brought about the famine that we're right in the middle of being engaged of. So I think it's a good thing ultimately, and wish you and your family all the best, and certainly your daughter.